There are a couple of beneficial ownership laws that are coming to the books right now in the United States and have already been available in other countries. Let's talk about that in relation to your wealth. Hi, I'm Justin Hitt with Sustainable Wealth Secrets. Beneficial ownership is a way for governments to map out who owns what organization, and very often is used in anti-money laundering as well as the monitoring of funds through a system like funding of terrorism and also for strategic reasons. I want to cover a few points about how this impacts your wealth. I do believe the current beneficial ownership laws that are coming out in the United States are an undue burden to small businesses, but they are legitimate in the sense that foreign actors very often invest through private individuals or small companies to buy up ownership and stock of public companies to which the state-owned agency wants to take over the public companies. So examples would be China getting access to chip manufacturing and telecommunications. Venezuela, for example, getting access to oil companies and petroleum processing companies. Same thing happened in the Middle East in a couple places. And this can happen both internal to a country and external to a country. It can happen one country against another or one country against its own citizens. The point being is that beneficial ownership is an indication of ability to influence a decision, but it doesn't take into account where a state interest might own, I don't want to say own, but they may have lent a large amount of money to private individuals with the request for them to invest it in a certain organization so that they can eventually roll up those shares under a leveraged buyout. Now, what I'm describing is not cloak and dagger spy stuff. It's no different than doing a leveraged buyout of an organization. I worked on a project where a development company was buying up houses in a community under different LLCs, and they were all randomly named. Sometimes they would do a rent to own with someone and put the individual's name on the title through like a temporary, not a temporary title, but kind of a transfer title under, and there was a contract separate. But eventually what they wanted to do is own 80 to 90% of the community before they then announced the project to bulldoze the whole community and build a different set of housing there. If you're doing a leverage buyout, you've probably seen it in the movies where a shareholder gains 51% of the shares and then goes to the board meeting and demands certain things of the board. Well, that's the same thing that can happen with a beneficial ownership situation. The problem is that beneficial ownership doesn't identify a syndication. Now, a syndication might be where the government loans a foreign government or a foreign entity or a criminal organization, all the same, loans money to businesses or individuals, and then those businesses and individuals invest in their target company with the promise that if they follow these instructions, they're actually going to get more gain when the lending factor forgives the loan in exchange for stock. Now, let me explain that a little bit clearer. Let's say a criminal organization is trying to do money laundering, for example. They give the money to businesses and individuals. They don't want to just give it to the individuals because the individuals might spend it where they don't. So they offer an interest rate. It might be it's a high interest rate, and the individuals might not need to make any payments as long as they follow the instructions provided by the funding organization. The business, for example, might put their 401k heavily loaded in a publicly traded company that they're targeting. The individuals might buy stocks in the publicly traded company and, in fact, trade on the money that was lent to them with the understanding that if they acquire enough shares or a certain number of shares to meet their little quota, that the governing organization or the lending organization will cash them out and they'll make money guaranteed. So they'll go in and they'll speculate on a stock, and this causes volatility in the marketplace. This volatility in the marketplace causes people to possibly sell off, which would give a lower price and allow the acquisition of more shares in a shorter period of time. But being funded by a source that may have unlimited amount of money, the source may be reducing their own risk by having things packaged up in a loan. So a government loans to businesses either cheap money or expensive money with the expressed intent that those individuals do something with that money in particular. It's a way of owning that business without actually owning the business, because the loans have to get paid. The loans are legal monetary instruments. Now, the loans could just be made up. They don't have to actually be real money. If in case of a government, the government could just print more money. So right now, China, for example, is subsidizing their postage and their manufacturing so that the Chinese domestic manufacturers can ship product to the U.S. for less than a U.S. domestic manufacturer can do the same. And this happens all the time, folks. China is just a current example. This happened with Japan when it came to consumer electronics. This happens in the United States when it comes to automobiles. The U.S. government bails out automobile manufacturers and banking, for example, and then those organizations turn around and sell more to foreign governments or foreign interests, and in turn, that stimulates something down the line. And then we're not going to go into tariffs and stuff. I just want to go into the two key points that you need to know to sustain your own wealth, because this is a Ponzi, by the way. This is a loan scheme that causes inflation. This is a loan scheme that sets up beneficial owners who are hidden from the public, so it's not very transparent of an action. And if you're a shareholder in that publicly traded company that is receiving the butt end of a leveraged buyout such as this, you could be in a position where the stock suddenly crashes. So a lot of times this kind of syndication will run up a stock artificially and then suddenly crash it out. Because again, it's not real money. What's real is the loan obligation the individuals have to the government or to the criminal organization. They're going to have to pay that loan back. What is also real is the transactions made by the individuals and again to acquire shares of the traded company. But what's not real is the underlying funding that's making this possible. So you can have an inflated market, you can have a deflated market, you have increased volatility. So really the first tip I have for you is to know where the money's coming from. Whether you're borrowing money or you're involved in a deal that's suddenly got a bunch of venture capital. I worked with a lot of venture capitalists during the .com. They go into deals with the underlying understanding that they're going to double their money in 5 years. Now, they don't go tell somebody that. They blow smoke up their ass and they talk about how what a great technology you have. I think there's a lot of potential here. Can you give us a little more information so we can run the numbers because we think we want to invest in you? And essentially, they're going to mine out the company they're investing in to create the profits. Now, they don't do this nefariously. They do this to double their money in 5 years. But at the end of 5 years, they don't need to double their money anymore. There's new opportunities on the horizon, and they dump the money. They dump the funds. They've done an IPO, for example, to cash out. There's some kind of cash out that potentially could cause like the .com crash. And I was intimately involved in the .com and both the receiving end of the .com crash. It was just fortunately I didn't chase the free money and end up homeless. I did end up homeless eventually, but I didn't end up a millionaire and then homeless and devastated like some of my friends were, unfortunately. It took years and years for them to recover. In my case, I ran the company in the ground because I had piss poor management and I had a lot of .com customers that went insolvent. But ultimately, I recovered from my bankruptcy within 2 years when I realized that sitting around complaining isn't going to get it any better. Anyway, my larger point is make sure you know where the money's coming from. Make sure you understand how they make their money. When a group loans money to individuals, they know they're going to get paid because a loan tends to get paid out first. They also, when it's a government or a criminal organization, can put physical pressure on the person who's received the loan and express how ungrateful they are that we've given you this money as a loan and we've given you these great deals and options and you didn't follow the instructions and now you've got to pay either way. You need to know where the money is. In fact, one time I was working on a deal. We had brought in some partners and I didn't get paid. And the deal is that I didn't pay them until I got paid. And I hadn't got paid yet. There's still performance due on the job. We were working out some things with the customer. These subs took me out in a parking lot and tried to bully me into paying them early. But see, they didn't have any leverage. They didn't have a contract. They didn't have anything other than the work that they performed. They didn't have any ownership of the customer itself. So in their case, they should have looked into that a little bit more and made sure their cash flow was in place before they started doing sub work with companies that had contracts that included you get paid when we get paid. But that's in there legitimately, because if they fail to perform or they do a poor job on the work, I wouldn't have paid them for poor work. But my point is, if you're going for hard money, personal loans, individual investors in a corporation, anything to fund a project, you need to know where the money came from. Not only are you going to be legally responsible for where the money came from with new laws that are coming in place, but it could be a source of funds that you don't want to be handled with. One of my clients, not personally working with me, accidentally received a bunch of funds from a criminal organization. They received a large influx of cash that they desperately needed from an organization who decided later they wanted more than just the interest on the money. They wanted to use the warehouse for things that were not legal. They wanted to use vehicles and access to assets in order to basically launder money and store do illegal activities. Now, the reason the criminal organization would do this is because when everything goes south, it's going to be that business owner that received the funds who gets in trouble, because their physical premises contained the illegal activity. Their physical premises and vehicles allowed transport of illegal goods. You just got to be aware of this, because you might be desperate for the money. Cash flow could be tight, and you just know this opportunity is going to take you to the next level. And then you do a pact with the devil, and they're going to always expect more than what's on paper. Number two is to make sure that you can trace funds before walking into a deal. Maybe you've got money, and somebody else has got a deal, and you just know this deal is going to work. Before you invest your hard-earned money in that deal, you need to know, where did the other money come from? This is called due diligence. You need to know where the funds are going. Is there a leverage buyout? Is there a situation here where they're not above board with what the information they provided you? You've got to be able to suspend the emotion and suspend the excitement of the opportunity. I had the opportunity to get in on some .com companies, get IPOs, and I opted to get paid. So they said early in the game, hey, look, we're going through the roof. We got these venture capitalists involved. Now, they didn't know that I had already been doing work with venture capitalists and helping shut down facilities and move them to consolidated data centers. But they're like, oh, man, everything's great. We just got $1 million in funding, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you stock, and you can just do the work for free. And I'm paraphrasing here. And I basically said, if you just got $1 million in funding, then you can afford my rate, and you're going to pay me now. And so I got the money up front for the necessary work, but it usually scoped back the project, because they're going to hook you along and string you along. And next thing you know, like in this particular case, and 2 years later, even though they got $20-30 million in funding, the IPO itself cashed out the venture capitalists. The owners in the company re-upped on the IPO. So they never really got cash. They re-upped in the sense they got more stock, but now it's publicly traded stock, and you could sell it one day, and then the company's worth nothing. But the venture capitalists, of course, got paid, because that's part of the structure and the way the deal was set up long before they found the person to do the deal with. So let me summarize this back to what helps you sustain wealth. First off, a lot of clients are qualified investors, but they're not sophisticated in the sense of doing this every day. Maybe they're running a business and they're using funds that they've set aside for retirement. Maybe they've just sold a business and they have a large lump sum. The very first thing you want to be aware of is that there are criminal organizations, government entities, foreign interests, bad actors in a sense, who are lending money they're even giving it money sometimes, to businesses and individuals for their own purposes. So you want to make sure that everything you do, you know where the money's coming from, you know how they acquired it, and you make sure the money is clean. Now, not only make sure the money's clean, is that any opportunities or conditions must be in the contract of order. So if they have a loan to you, but they want you to take a certain percentage of the loan and buy from their brother-in-law some equipment rather than your current vendor, you need to make sure there's a clause in there that you can not do that, for one, but you can also have a valid procurement system in place where you're buying from the best vendor. You're not buying. We set up a deal a long time ago where I was acquiring computer systems, and I found out this was in 1993, and I found out the drop point was in Iraq. It was actually in Baghdad. And so I'm getting these guys are ready to buy, and they've got money, and they're prepaying, and I'm setting up custom systems for them. And then I thought, wait a second, they tell me this last minute, you want me to drop this stuff in Baghdad, computer systems. So I go to the ITAR register and realize that there's the Iraqi war. And there's a this is something that's going on. So there's also ITAR, which is the International Traffic in Arms. Basically, they want several hundred computers. I call the local branch of the FBI and I say, hey, by the way, folks, these people want to buy a bunch of computers and ship it to this address. Anything I ought to know about that? Well, long story short is the FBI took over the deal for me. I basically discussed the deal. They put viruses on the printers and on the computer systems. And when it all got over to Saddam Hussein, it didn't work the way it was expected to work. And I can talk about it now, but at the time, it was kind of something that was part of that due diligence. The customer's excited about the order. They want to give me money, but something's not right. The shipping looks strange. The way they wanted me to package and build the systems didn't make any sense. And then ultimately, how do we validate our information here? How do we know that we're doing what's right? And then finally, the same goes with your money. Before you put your money in a deal, you want to make sure it's not Bernie Madoff. And the way that you do that is, again, tracing out beneficial ownership. Look at track record. And look beyond what the provider is giving you. If you want to keep your wealth, you're in the right place. I'm Justin Hitt with Sustainable Wealth Secrets. I could go into this in a lot more detail, but do understand that free money, good money deals always have strings on them, and you need to be aware of what's potentially out there before you invest in other companies. If you're buying into something that just got a bunch of influx of cash, you need to know where that cash came from, because it can all be taken away quite easily. I want to thank you for listening. If you have questions about this or any other program, visit us at www.sustainablewealthsecrets.com.